got the thumbs up, so I believe that we're ready to go. It is good to see everyone out. If you would go ahead and we'll grab our Bibles and get to Luke chapter 23. I am doing the impossible. I have finished a book, or going to finish a book as of next week in 6 months. You don't think I'm joking. You have scarred me. You have given me such grief over taking so long to do books. I'm paranoid. Let a few people. Luke chapter 23. It's good to see everyone out, whether you're here in person or online with us. I'd made the mistake, as Richard has pointed out already this morning, of saying that I was finished in July. I got my quarters off, but we're going to finish Luke here in the next 2 weeks, or next week. Let's, as my form flow, let's read the chapter and then go back and make some discussion. And this morning I'm actually going to read from the ESV versus the New King James. Then the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate, and they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying to himself, he is Christ, a king." And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered, "You have said so." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no fault in this man." But they were urgently saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea from Galilee even to this place." When Pilate heard this, he asked whether this man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at the time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he had heard about him and was hoping to see some sign done by him. So he questioned him at some length, and he made no answer. The chief priests and scribes stood nearby, vehemently accusing him, and Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then arraying him in splendid clothing, he sent him back to Pilate. Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day, for before this they had been at enmity with each other. Pilate then called together the chief priests and the rulers of the people and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was misleading the people. And after examining him before you, behold, I do not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish and release him." But they cried out all together, "Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas," a man who had been thrown into prison for the insurrection started in the city for murder. Pilate answered them once more, desiring to release Jesus. But they kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" A third time he said to them, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no guilt deserving death. I will therefore punish and release him." But they were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate decided that their demand should be granted. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, for whom they asked, but he delivered Jesus over to their will. And as they led him away, they seized Simon of Cyrene, who was coming from the country, and laid the cross on him to carry it behind Jesus. And there followed him a great multitude of people and then women who were mourning and lamenting for him. But turning to them, Jesus said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the barren and the wombs that have never bore, and the breasts that were never nursed.' Then they will begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do these things to wood is green, when the wood is green, what happens when it is dry?" 2 others who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified him and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." And they cast lots to divide his garments, and the people stood by watching. But the rulers scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is Christ of God. he the chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who was hanging railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, "Truly, I say this day you will be with me in paradise." It was now about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus called out with a loud voice, saying, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And having said this, he breathed his last. Now when a centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God, saying, "Certainly this man was innocent." And all the crowds that had assembled for the spectacle, when they saw what had taken place, returned home, beating their breast. And all his acquaintances, the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. Now there was a man named Joseph from a Jewish town of Arimathea. He was a member of the council, a good, righteous man, who had not consented to their decision and action. And he was looking for the kingdom of God. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down and wrapped it in a linen shroud and laid it in a tomb cut in stone, where no one had been laid. It was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was beginning. The women who had come with him from Galilee followed and saw the tomb where his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. On the Sabbath they rested according to the commandment. As we begin, I want you to think about chapter 22. What had just taken place in chapter 22? And you can cheat. You can flip back a page and read it there. Butch, would you like to take a stab? I asked a question. I want an answer. Peter denied him. The Last Supper. What's the time frame between chapter 22 and chapter 23? Less than 12 hours. The Lord's Supper, or the Lord's Supper, the Last Supper as we call it, I don't know if they eat like it. We don't know if they were getting the early bird discount or if they were there at 7 or 8 o'clock. We don't know. But it was probably the afternoon and the evening. Lee had done an excellent sermon several weeks ago or several months ago about the time frame, about how this was a kangaroo court and nothing was happening right. They didn't do things just in the middle of the night. They didn't do things the way they were bouncing around. So I'm not even going to try to go there because Lee did such an excellent job, and I've not studied it well enough to see the time frame. So I would encourage you to go back and look at the archives on the YouTube or our videos channels. Luke, on one hand, doesn't give us the details that some of the other Gospels do. But yet Luke does give us a lot of details. And I believe if you don't get hung up on what Luke doesn't give us and really look at what Luke does give us, there's a lot here for us to think about. But we're in hours. And what I want us to think about as we start to go through and dissect this a little bit is this. You've just spent 3 years with Jesus. You're a disciple. You're one of the apostles. You've not truly understood these parables that he would give here and there. You're still arguing over who's the greatest. At that Last Supper, there's still, you can see, those of us, it's not a man thing only. I guess women may do it, but men, sometimes we have these little contests to see who's the biggest, the baddest. We got a pecking order. We got to prove ourselves. So even the apostles are struggling with this. Who's the greatest? And Jesus is talking about, if you want to become the greatest, you need to be the least. So they're going from spending 3 years, this is the Messiah, under seeing miracles, seeing people being raised from the dead, seeing people healed, all these different things going on, to he's in a garden praying to where blood is dripping off of his forehead, to where Peter is saying, "Man, I'm going to go to my death with you." He whips out a sword, rips or cuts off an ear. They go from having dinner with him to the next morning, he's being tried. Peter's at a distance. He's already denied him. He's off torn apart crying because he can't comprehend what he's just done to the Son of God. "12 hours? Jeff, can I pick on you? One morning you get up and get on a bike and life's normal. And within how long? Sometimes you get in a car, you're going somewhere. Life, death, marriage, divorce, kids, jobs, money. Sometimes we're trucking along and life seems pretty normal, and all of a sudden it's turned upside down. Put yourself in their shoes. They're with the Messiah, they're with the Son of God, they're with this. They didn't understand everything. But these men and women were devoting their lives following. He's talking about something, the kingdom coming and all that, as Richard points out every week. They were expecting that physical earthly kingdom. He's talking a spiritual. They're trying their best to put everything together. And they just saw a mob come take him, an ear cut off, an ear healed. He's drug off. He's between the greatest two leaders in the region. And what are these leaders saying? Well, what's the accusation? He's turning our country upside down. The ESV says in the very beginning of the chapter, we found this man misleading our nation. I read out of the ESV intentionally because the New King James says, we found this man, who's got it there in front of him? Perverting our nation. When I think of perversion, I think of something grotesque. I usually think of something sexual that shouldn't be. Misleading, whether it's the same words, whether they translate it correctly. But those that are accusing Jesus, it's not just, well, he's teaching something we didn't like. He's perverting our nation. Does that word in your mind carry a little bit more weight? Now think about also what they're dealing with. Pilate, Herod, question them, and what's their response? I don't want to put him to death. You've brought charges, you've brought accusations. I can't find the evidence. And what are the people doing? Crucify him. I don't want to crucify him. He's not deserving death. 3 times. What can we see there? What can we learn? How easy, or think about our culture. They didn't want truth. They weren't willing to accept truth. We deal with people at work and our families that you want to talk to them about the gospel. You want to share Christ with them. And so he says, well, what's our culture basically say about those things? In our family, we don't talk religion, sex, or politics. We don't want to talk about it because it's so offensive. We're so afraid. We're not willing to deal with things that might cause us to think, or might get us out of our own little box, or might make us a little bit uncomfortable. So much so, crucify him. I'd rather have the murderer let loose. Now, we can easily step back and go, but it had to happen that way. It was the plan of God. If it hadn't happened, we wouldn't have I understand that. And that's hard to separate as humans, and we start thinking in our mind as if these were, again, I brought it up last week, like they're little puppets and they're forced to do these things. No, they weren't forced to do anything. They made decisions. But yet God knew what their decisions were going to be in advance. Crucify him. But he's done nothing wrong. We got a guiltless man, and yes, all of this is following into God's plan. It's what was supposed to happen. And again, don't dismiss because it was God's plan and it was foreknown and it was foretold and it had to happen so that you and I could be here today. Don't dismiss the emotion. Don't dismiss the wrongdoing. Don't dismiss the attitude of the people to go, we really don't care what truth is. We want it our way. John, I kind of see you.
Yeah, that's the culture we live in today. Have it your way, and have it any way you want it, and we'll be tolerant and deciding very critical and important things of life in a frenzied, emotional state is not good. It just shows the ultimate weakness and frailty of mankind to me. Jesus says, Father, forgive them, they don't understand what they're doing. We don't understand a lot of things.
We don't have to, we don't understand on a different level. To come to God, we don't have to understand all things. In self-development, you'll get some of those gurus will say, you never make a permanent decision based on temporary emotions. But we see the power of a mob mentality. Let's get our pitchforks, let's get our torches, and let's go after. I would venture to say that many of those within the mob didn't understand what they were doing. Gary?
Where was the throngs and thousands of people that were following him? Where were their voices?
Gary asked, where were his followers? Well, we see that some of those followers...
I'm talking about, the people who've been following him all over, hearing his sermons.
We don't know. They disappeared. They got afraid when the tough got going. They didn't. Not understanding the difference between a spiritual kingdom and an earthly kingdom, or this warrior kingdom. It's really easy to get behind somebody. I don't know if any of you all ever remembered being in high school. David's saying he don't remember being in high school. Do you ever remember there was a fight? And people would line the hallways to watch this fight, or they were going back and forth and they'd get this little crowd and everybody'd chase them and follow them. This little sidebar here. Boxing, MMA stuff is pretty big money right now. Old McGregor, I don't know how much he gets paid for going in a ring. There's not enough money to cause me to go into a ring to get my brains beat out. I'm not that bad. But there's something about violence, gets excited, motivation, and adrenaline rushes and things like that. You do stupid stuff. I don't know what's happening here, mob mentality, but the fact is they did not want truth. Last chapter we saw that what happened is Jesus in some of his talking was, well, even if I told you, you wouldn't listen. That's a warning for us. Now I know, I see you, Bert. Biblical interpretation, we need to know what they were thinking, and then we come forward to us. But I have to be very careful to make sure that when Jesus is telling me something, am I willing to listen? Bert?
Well, they were concerned about the truth. One of them concerned about it became too popular and taking over. People following us. We don't get rid of him, then what's going to happen to the government?
Well, they...
Got to get rid of the most popular person so we can continue the way we want it, the way Caesar wanted.
People, okay, what you just said, they were worried about power. We have, and we struggle with that. But what would be the cure to that? Knowledge and understanding. We have to seek that knowledge and understanding. Howard?
Well, the Pharisees and Sadducees had their own followers, and they had power as far as it went for the Jews. And they didn't like what Jesus was doing.
It threatened them because they were going to lose their following.
They saw that he was so popular that their lifestyle was going to go away. And they were in control of the power. And that's how they ultimately convinced the Roman authorities to follow through with getting rid of it. And they thought that would be done. They didn't believe that Jesus was.
It got to the point where even their voices were so strong. The leaders knew what they should have done. We don't get in this reading about washing of hands and saying, I want nothing to do with this. It's not recorded here. And I started off by saying he doesn't give us all the details we see in other Gospels. The leaders don't want to do it, but what did they do? They bowed to the people. They were no leaders. You want to make any? We don't want to take the time to make parallels to our political establishment today. Bowing to the people. When we read and talk about where Paul talks about in Timothy, how that people having itching ears will heap up teachers doing what we want them to do versus being willing to say, I don't care what this world throws at me, whether it's riches or poverty, whether it's sickness or health, whether it's a homeless or not, I'm going to stick with my God. But as we think about that, I wanted you to see, when Herod sends him to Pilate, Pilate's heard of this man. And what does Pilate say? Or what does the text tell us about Pilate's reaction when Jesus comes to him? Right, I had it backwards. Pilate sends him to Herod, but you're absolutely right. I want to see him. I'm hoping to see something else. I've heard of this man. As I read that, I thought, Jesus was treated kind of like a circus sideshow. Perform for me. What can you do? But yet, we see all throughout his life, as he did these things, people may have followed Gary, right? He had masses. But yet, when push comes to shove, we catch ourselves thinking, man, if I find myself on a regular, I won't say regular basis, but it's not uncommon to think when I'm going through something, I just wish God would talk to me. I wish he'd give me an answer. I wish he could, Father, help me see. Help me know what I'm supposed to do right now. Can you show me something? Can you give me a sign? And then I have to kind of back off and go, okay, God's not going to tap me on the shoulder. He's not going to whisper in my ear. He's not going to do something like that. But I have to take the evidence that I do have and understand the nature of God, the desire of God, what God's trying to accomplish, and make a wise decision. I put a lot of prayer into it, look at Scripture, but God's not saying, Craig, take the left door. Left door. It's hard. It's a challenge. It's faith. Herod's wanting to see a sign. Herod sends him back. Pilate are now buddies. They used to not like each other. But two of the leaders, again, sometimes we think about Barabbas, we talk about this man that was a murderer and all that. That really doesn't faze us because we release murderers all the time. That wouldn't bother us. Didn't bother them. They weren't worried about the big picture there. But what I want to take is just a second and think about this. In the garden the night before, Jesus was praying so much, Father, I don't want to do this. If there's any way possible for some other way to happen, let it be done. Let this cup pass from me. But if it's your will, I'm going to do this. And we talk about his strength there. But how does he handle the questioning by both Pilate and Herod.
Basically, he just remained silent.
I heard you. Brandon. He's very quiet. He's humble. It's as you've said, he doesn't say much at all. Think for a moment, and I think, Richard, you brought this up about 3 weeks ago. He could have called 10,000 angels as we sing. Let me ask you, if you were there and you just are being questioned and being beaten, and they ask, "Are you the King of the Jews?" I don't know all of your professions, so I can't say, "Well, are you an insurance agent?" You're going to go, "Yeah, buddy, I am." You're going to want to get out of there. When you're accused, what is your normal reaction? Richard says deny. Let me ask you this. Husbands, when your wives come after you, what do you normally do? You defend yourself. Now, some of you are smiling. That's because you're sitting too close to your wife right now. God in the flesh, being accused, being beaten, being ridiculed, knows that he's getting ready to be hung on a cross, is able not to defend himself. Do you, as an argumentative, hard-headed, I gotta be right at all costs person, and my daughter's shaking her head, that's not right. Do you understand the power of what this man is doing? Barabbas.
How much do we really know about this guy?
I have to admit, I don't know a lot. There might be others. But it says that he stirred up the people. There's an insurrection, and he's a murderer.
So is it possible that he was a zealot?
I guess it could be.
Because it almost thinks, the way this plays
I don't know.
The way this plays out in the story, I hate to say it in the Bible, it just does not say it. It doesn't say it about Barabbas, but if the guy was a zealot, it's almost like the people, and even Jesus predicted the fall of Jerusalem. You got to wonder how much of that fall was caused by Barabbas.
I don't even,
I apologize.
not being disrespectful, I don't even want to go there because it is a struggle, Matt. And like we said, we knew that this had to happen to fulfill God's plan. But we've got so many things going on here. We've got, even way back in biblical prophecy of Daniel talking about the different kingdoms, we've got Roman officials who put themselves up as God. So I don't think it's him. It's providential, but there's so many things at work, it's hard for us to understand. We just have to kind of, see the truth of God, that how there was no contradiction, how the prophecy hundreds of years in advance, Jesus fulfills it. It's there for us to go, this is it. This is truth. No matter it's Barabbas, Pilate, Herod, Nero, whatever happens, it's there for us to go, there's no other way. This is the only logical explanation.
But it's almost like, I don't know, in my imagination, I don't want to go down rabbit hole or anything like that, but follow me for just a second. At that moment, the choice was given, Jesus or Barabbas. It's like the fate of Jerusalem and Israel was in their own hands at that moment. They chose Barabbas.
Just hold that thought right there. The fate of the world, we're in two leaders and a crowd. The leaders didn't have enough backbone, and the crowd didn't want the truth. Apply that message to you and to me of trying to walk with God or not walk with God, and what hinders us. When things are obvious, are we trying to deny God, or are we willing to humble ourselves before God and accept it, even though it sometimes is uncomfortable?
And how many times do we choose the world when we seal our own fate to the things that we experience when we could have chosen a better path at the beginning?
Not many of the holes I've been in life were just fate or just by accident. I dug most of them. I always tell people around me, when you find yourself in a hole, the first thing you do is stop digging. It's not that you start to climb out. You can't climb out if you're still digging your own hole. You got to stop. Let's go on. Let's not get sidetracked too much. I don't find any guilt. So we see everything fulfilling prophecy falling into place just like it is. But there's one or two things we want to look at here. They're walking. Here's Simon. We put the cross on him. Verse 28. But Jesus, we got verse 27. A great multitude of the people followed him. So Gary, we don't have the thousands necessarily, but we have a great multitude. They were mourning. But Jesus turning to them said, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For indeed the days are coming in which they will say, Blessed are the barren and the wombs never bore, and breasts which never nursed. Why? Well, in Lee's Revelation class, because things are going to come with the fall of Jerusalem and everything, that kind of like when Lot is running, it's going to happen so fast. You don't have time. You don't want to have kids there. You don't want to be nursing. You don't want to be up, ready to go. It's going to hit fast. So blessed are those. So bad. So listen to what as he continues on. Then they will say to the mountains, fall on us, cover us. It's going to get so bad. He's predicting, letting them know that this transition and the fall of the Roman Empire and what all is going to happen to the church and the persecution, it's going to be so bad that you would be grateful not to have kids, and you'd like to be dead. And verse 31 kind of made me scratch my head for a minute, but as I thought about it and looked at some commentaries, for if they do these things to the green wood, what will be done to the dry? And I thought about what it was talking about was the green wood being the governments and all that stuff and everything going on. But what if Jesus is the green wood? If they're going to crucify, if they're going to kill the green wood, what's going to happen when the wood is no longer green, when it's dry? And he's again predicting the future of what's going to happen to the church, to Rome, and all that kind of stuff. I am God, and they're doing this to me. What's going to happen when God's not here physically? Brother.
I appreciate the forward-looking perspective on that statement, but that statement is timeless. That particular circumstance, blessed are the women who are barren and never had children. See, that's happened many times in many nations, way before Jesus was present on earth. So the teaching there is a very strong warning that this thing continues to happen throughout time. When darkness takes over, that happens, period. You have to have light in order for that not to have happened, or green wood. It's interesting. We can look at it as a prophetic for what's coming. You don't have to look at it that way. It's already happened many times.
If you're not able to hear the statement, what brother's saying is that this isn't something that's a one time in history, but yet we can see over and over and over, and will continue to happen, about how the world in darkness handles light, being prepared. But even when I think of the green wood, you ever just, why? Why me, God? Why me? Why do I need to go through this garbage? Why do I need to suffer? Why is it so tough? What did I do to deserve this? If they nailed Jesus to the cross, why should I have it any easier? Why should I expect, if they're going to do this to the God, I'm just Craig. Why should I expect to have it better or easier or smoother? And then, so there's so much here. They lead him, he's crucified. We got the criminals, one on his left, one on his right. And then somebody mentioned it earlier, when we get to verse 34. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. We see the heart of Jesus. We see the mercy of God. We see the grace of God. We're taught that vengeance is mine, says the Lord. I think that's a good thought to think about right here is that, Jesus was able to forgive because he knew what was going on. He understood the plan. He's already prayed the night before. Just, again, guys, this is just a few hours from sitting in the garden going, Father, if there's any way I can do this another way, if this cup can pass, please. He took his responsibility. He's doing it, and he's saying, Father, forgive them. They don't understand it. When we're struggling with somebody and we feel that they're doing us wrong, we feel that they've really hurt us, they've persecuted us, they've treated us in a way that we're not deserving. Think about that statement. Father, they really don't know what they're doing. I think so many times we take things so personally. And I'm not saying I've got it mastered, guys. Don't hear me. I've not walked on water yet. I'm sorry. I'm not. My mind just is crazy sometimes. But to understand that most of the time when things are happening, people are so selfish and wrapped up in their own world, they're not thinking about what they're doing and they don't understand what they're doing. It makes it a lot easier to forgive and to not hold grudges and to not be bitter when we can understand what Jesus is saying. He had every right, maybe right's not the word. He had every ability to tear them apart, to rain down brimstone, to jump off the cross, to do whatever he so desired. But he was submitting to God, his Father, because he knew it's what needed to be done to fulfill the plan. And in that, he's able to say, I can take a lot of bull in this life. But one thing that's hard for me to take is when people ridicule me and make fun of me. Especially without a cause. When I'm an idiot, I take it a little bit better. When I deserve it, I'm a little bit... But I'm not good at taking jokes sometimes. Come on, Jesus, jump down off that cross. Save yourself. If you're the Son of God. They've attacked him at his true identity. And he's still able to maintain because he knows what he's got to accomplish. And then when he goes through this, and he says, he cries and he's talking to God, and we don't have the Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, talking about my God, why have you forsaken me? But what does Luke say that Jesus says to his Father? Not in this text. What's this text? What does Jesus say to his Father here? Forgive them, but there's a second statement. I trust my spirit into your hands. One of the biggest comforts, and you'll hear me talk about it from time to time, and we sing a song about it, and Paul wrote it. I know whom I believed, and I'm persuaded that he is able to keep that which I have committed to him. Think about that statement and what Jesus is saying. When all the world's falling apart, I've got so much confidence in you. I'm nailed to a cross, bleeding and dying. And we don't have the imagery here in this text like the other ones where he's beat and his back is bloody raw. Why they had to even give the cross to Simon. God, I put my life, my soul, my being into your hands. The Apostle Paul can say that. I've got so much confidence in who you are, what your plan is. I know that I'm betting my soul. I'm betting my eternity on this plan. Because if I'm wrong, I'm a fool. But if I'm right, I get heaven with God's presence forever. And he's saying, I'm so convinced, and for you and me to take Paul's words, that I know whom I believe. I know who God is. I know who the Son is. I know what I believe, and I'm putting my all in your trust and your confidence. Carry me through. And as he goes on, I mean, the beautiful imagery of all of this. We've got the thieves on the cross, kind of one bad-mouthing him. Again, the humanity of Jesus to be able to stay and not come off of there. But we've got the one, Matt, you mentioned a zealot a minute ago. This other thief on the cross at least knew enough about who was hanging beside him, calls him by name, and says, this man is guiltless. He's got enough confidence to say to Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. He knows enough about what's going on to know that there's a kingdom. And as all this is happening, even a centurion says, this must be God.
I think that's pretty amazing also that nothing really miraculous happens right there on the cross or any part of that event. But yet he says that. So you must have had faith or heard obviously the stories of that one garrison leader's healings or just word around.
The message had spread. This wasn't in a vacuum. It wasn't one little area. This message, we're seeing all over the world, people are hearing this message. And some accept and some don't. Verses 47. So the centurion saw what had happened, and what had just happened. Jesus' reaction to the thief on the cross. You will be with me. Father, forgive them. Everything going on. We could have a whole class on the imagery of this veil being ripped. And this curtain being ripped was what? The symbolism between in the temple itself that only the high priest can go into a certain area. Very limited access. No normal person can get there. There's a separation between man and God that was brought on by sin in the very beginning. The blood of bulls and goats were sprinkled on that altar in that limited area, and now it's ripped open. There's no longer that separation. We can access God. Darkness over the whole earth. And we think, wow, darkness. And in even Lee's sermons, he's just pointed out, documented by the Roman authorities, written, not by godly men, not by inspired scripture, but actual historians. It was dark. But look, the centurion saw it. Certainly this was a righteous man. And the whole crowd who had come together to see the sight, mob mentality, let's see let's see, woohoo, we got a crucifixion today. What had been done, beat their breasts, returned. But listen to verse 49. But all of his acquaintances and the women who followed him from Galilee stood at a distance and watched these things. "10, 12, 15 hours, less than one day, all was well." We're having a dinner. He's predicting things. Dinner's over. He prays. He goes to the garden. They could tell he's distressed. They're still bickering over who's the greatest. Mob comes, ears are cut off, Jesus heals it. He's been beaten, he's bloody, he's nasty, he can't even carry his own cross. And you've been with him for 3 years and you're having to stand at a distance and watch this. What's the feeling in your gut right now? Despair, hopelessness, uncertainty. I made comment about those fights. I get sick to my stomach. If I were to see it, in an accident, I get jumped in that fight or flight and I do okay. But if I have to see blood unnecessarily, somebody just getting ripped apart, I get sick. This is my Savior. This is the man I've followed. This is God. He's up there dying. We're seeing a sponge, sour wine. We're seeing him ridiculed. My whole world is falling apart from what I'm perceiving, and I'm trying to hold on.
I think they might be wondering why he doesn't do something to help himself too.
I'm sure there's a lot of confusion. They're not fully understanding. But my point is this, not to make anybody sick to their stomach, but get us to understand. And we don't like feeling guilty or anything like that sometimes. But this isn't just a little flannel graph Bible story. This is the price that was paid for me. And we have to remember that from time to time. This is God's plan, and it wasn't a movie that happened perfectly and with soundtracks and all that. And it was a real man, his son, that had to die because I choose, back to this mob mentality, give me the righteous man or give me the murderer. And I choose the murderer all the time, so that the righteous man had to be crucified for me. We get wrapped up in our day-to-day life and our jobs and our everything going on, and sometimes we forget about the spiritual aspect because it's really easy to live in the physical. I don't want you to walk around going, "Oh, poor woe." I want you to be confident, and I want you to hold your shoulders up, and I want you to be strong. But we're blessed because of what happened, but I caused it. I caused it. And then this one man, it says, is a council member, and he must have been something important because he's able to go to Pilate, and he says to Pilate, well, forget what he says to Pilate about give me the body, and this is where I'll end the class. He was a man who did not consent to everything that had been happening. Did you notice that in the writing? He's a council member. He's one of the groups that could have, well, his partners were the ones saying, he's tearing up our whole country. He's doing this wrong. He's blasphemous. He didn't agree with all that. And then the next thing it says about it, he was looking for the kingdom. He was looking for the kingdom. There's just so much beauty. Even if we don't get into the false trial, the kangaroo courts and all that kind of garbage going on, Jesus handled the hardest day in history. And he did it with confidence. And we dismiss the fact that, oh, well, he's God. He was human, and he handled it because he had faith in God. We can handle it with faith in God, to commit our souls, to commit our lives to him. Take the next few minutes, prepare your minds for worship. Thank you.